Hello everyone, welcome to another insightful episode of EdBites by MRCC. So, today we are thrilled to have Jennifer Sheffer, the Director of Nursing Education and Product Management and Interim Innovation Strategist from ANA, joining us for a fascinating discussion on a transforming the healthcare landscape, artificial intelligence in nursing. I'm Shahrukh Khan, Business Development Director at MRCC. This conversation will help us explore the evolving landscape of AI in nursing, comparing its capabilities to human expertise. So, welcome to the show, Dr. Jennifer, and we would love to hear something about yourself and ANA.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. I'm thrilled to be here and do this with you guys. So my background, I am a nurse. So I started out in nursing as a regular registered nurse in the United States, and that typically starts with you work in certain specialty areas. Mine happened to be pediatrics and pediatric intensive care. So I was in that role for a lot of my career. But as a lot of nurses evolve in their nursing careers, I did the same, and I started going down the education route. And so some nurses go into management, some go into higher levels like chief nursing officers and things like that. I chose the educator path, and so I did a little work with nurses at the bedside and onboarding them. I also did some faculty work, and so I kind of just did that natural transformation, natural evolvement into professional development and continuing nursing education for nurses. Once I left the bedside, I've been back and forth, to be honest with you. But the first time I left the bedside in 2011, I went and worked for I did a big pivot and went and worked for a online for-profit education company for nurses, and was their executive director for a number of years, building education programming in online, fully online and virtual, and some hybrid workshops in that learning environment. And that's really where I kind of started really diving into distance learning and how important it is and the reach that we get in there and doing those programs. Then I went back to the bedside again, and then I was a hospice nurse during the pandemic, and I did that while finishing my doctorate. Then I started working at the ANA in 2021 as their director of nursing education. And then I recently, in July, just also am taking on another role, an additional role as innovation strategist. And that's because my career has kind of pivoted as well to not just building education programming or products, but it's also in the relationship management and the strategy behind what we're doing in that innovation space. And for the last year or so, I've really been able to deep dive and use a lot of AI into our programming and develop it and really kind of advocating for nurses on how they can also empower themselves as nursing educators and professional development specialists, what those AI ties are, and kind of how you utilize it to create efficiency. So that's like just the short start of where I am. And then, what my hope is that this trajectory that I'm on continues, that I really am able to advance nursing education, how leverage AI to help educators really understand how they can innovate and in their own nursing practice, but also in their own education programs, and create those standards around what it should look like versus what it should not look like, and kind of how that develops in their own practice settings, regardless of whether they're like me and they're in the business side now, or they are still practicing at the bedside and are doing direct patient care. So that's what I'm hopeful for.
Wonderful. Because you mentioned COVID, so can you brief us a little bit more the kind of shift you have seen before COVID and after COVID? And what were the challenges ANA was going through it, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so typically, nursing education kind of started with informal training back in the day. Like, hospitals themselves or religious organizations were actually providing the training related to, nurses who were taking care of patients, military, and those types of workforces. Florence Nightingale, as you probably know, was probably the one who first formalized the concept of formal nursing education, and then we kind of switched it to standardized. Now we have university programs, and we also now have advanced practice roles, so nurse practitioners, nurse anesthetists, and so forth. Pre-COVID, we had increased integration of technology into our nursing education, mainly in sim labs. So simulation labs where you have the mannequin and you have the technology that goes along, whether their eyes are opening or they make sounds, and having been faculty in those and using them quite frequently, it became standard. That was the limit of the technology integration. And then, certain universities that were well known for their online courses were also standard, but they weren't really as popular. They were, some would argue, and some would say that they were seen as lesser programming, or lesser programs, that the knowledge wasn't as great, because the traditional route was, brick and mortar. You got to go sit in your seat and listen to the lecture forever. And then the other tech integration was also with electronic health records training. So we also had to learn about how to, use and document everything, our patient interactions and everything inside an EHR. A lot of the interprofessional education, again, still traditionally emphasized on collaborative practice and multidisciplinary teams and different practice settings. So post-COVID, so the collaborative practice, interprofessional education really didn't change. So that still remained, but there was a rapid transition to online learning. Number one, because we had to. I was actually teaching, I was working, as I mentioned before, working at the bedside in hospice care, and also teaching at a university here in the sim lab. So it was an in-person simulation lab at a local university. And when March of 2020 happened, we were in our classrooms, and then we couldn't be in our classrooms anymore. Both of my master's degrees were from an online university, and I used that skill set and that knowledge on all of a sudden not just working in Zoom, but also how to work in the platform to then build effective programming. So those of us who had that education when it really was seen as possibly not that popular of a method to go to grad school, were able to just fit right in and teach our students, because we had already had that experience for ourselves. Now, simulation's tough, so we had to get really creative over Zoom and really start to figure out, because sim is hands-on learning. So how did we kind of flip that classroom a little bit to get our students up to speed with what they needed, because they needed to sit for their in-class exam that next summer. So like I said, there was rapid transition to online learning. Virtual classrooms in traditional brick and mortar schools were all of a sudden, they're moving, and trying to do it and pivot really quickly. There was the concept of virtual reality now, so that has exploded in nursing education, and telehealth training, remote skills, patient monitoring, and those types of things. The other piece, and what was really a factor, is psychological support during the pandemic in nursing education. So the increased stress and burnout, not just for students and faculty and nurses at the bedside, but it was also felt just in our everyday overall life. So if you are going to school and you're also a nurse at the bedside, and you now have to pivot to online school, and you have to be at the bedside taking care of these patients, the emphasis then also flipped to education on mental health and self-care strategies. So we saw not only a shift in the way it's delivered, but the actual content, it focusing on or including emphasis on mental health and self-care strategies. So I think that those are the big ones. I think that also makes, we had to make sure that those accreditation standards were still upheld with those online programs. And I think we've done a pretty good job of it. And now it's kind of seems like every university now has some sort of online learning capabilities now, and not and or association. So at the ANA, I wasn't here at 2020 and 2021, but in 2020, we couldn't put on, and most associations this happened to, you couldn't put on your professional development conferences. You couldn't have conferences. They were gone. So we had to pivot really quickly to create, to get a virtual platform, to have a virtual conference, to still keep nurses engaged in the things that we were doing. It was important to our members. It was important to the accreditation cycle. It was important to a lot of things. And so, again, associations in particular had to pivot really quickly to make sure that those offerings and that outlet for nurses was still there. So that's a big difference, but yeah. It's still evolving. We're still doing it. We're seeing a lot of things in virtual reality and extended reality and things like that.
Exactly, and that makes a lot of sense to me. And as today's topic is AI, so I would like to know your opinion on the traditional human nurses. How do you compare them with the AI nurses?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're still defining this right now. We are still trying to figure out the terminology to use, what is important to nurses to still keep that, and then what really is AI versus virtual versus, what is our role in this? And so I think that right now we are talking about the use of AI as a tool rather than calling it an AI nurse. That's going to be really tough to float for nurses because we don't want it to seem like, because it's a specialty area, right? It doesn't have to be a bot or something. It can be, but defining that and pulling it out as, a nurse, a tool for nurses to use, it's going to be really important for nurses to adopt it. It can't seem to be contradicting into what we do as humans, and what the AI can't do. And so if we use it in that perspective, so predictive analytics, those types of AI integrations into our nursing practice, that's going to be important. All the natural language processing tools, interpreting our clinical notes, extracting information in order to make decisions down the road is going to be really important. Robotics, we know that there are organizations that are already using robotics in doing administrative tasks. So that's really important to help keep us and what we do best at the bedside, which is to be there for patients and their families. And so framing it in a way that will be not seen as contradicting or a replacement for nurses. So that's going to be really important, because what human nurses do is clinical decision making. We use those tools to support our clinical decisions and our autonomy in nursing. A lot of times when I talk about this, we talk about how it starts with a human, then the AI, and then your output at the end is also evaluated and looked at by a human. And there's no replacement for that, because what we put into any AI, regardless of the type, is what your output is going to be. And still, at the end of the day, we're still responsible. As the humans, we are 100% responsible for what care is delivered at the bedside. So we need to make sure that our clinical judgment, our experience, our intuition, I tell nursing students all the time, that thing that is going off in your brain, that your gut feeling, that is a reason that you're paying attention to it. It's because of what your knowledge is and your experience level. So you have to use that a lot of the times. The AI can't also understand the emotional and the social factors of what's going on, regardless of what's happening with the patient. There's things that are left out, which is why it's important to discern and determine, and define really clearly where that line is in those care. So, I say it's still evolving. We still have virtual assistants coming out. Like I said, we have robots, but there's no replacing a human nurse for compassion and empathy. That's just not going to happen in an AI on a real basis. So I think, again, we're trying to make sure that, we are that AI and the use of AI in nursing is complementary to what we do as humans, because all of those AI technologies can enhance and create these efficiencies for us. It can actually be somewhat more accurate in certain ways and can help in our scope of nursing practice, but it has to make sure that it's done the right way to enable nurses to focus more on patient-centered care and using their clinical decision-making and ethical judgment. So I think that that's the framework in which we're trying to go to and trying to move on with. And again, I'm saying this right now, and it could change in 5 minutes. So it's changing every single day. But it has this great ability to possibly, transform healthcare delivery. We just need to make sure that those human factors stay those human factors.
Correct. And so that brings me to my next question. What does ANA, what measures does ANA takes to make sure the high standards of the safety of the patients and at the same time accuracy of the monitoring?
So we are in the middle of actually crafting. We have one position statement on AI. It came out in 2022, and it's about the ethical guidelines that's related to patient safety and accuracy and quality care that have always been. So it's still maintaining those standards of care. It is, generally speaking, and again, we're in the process of looking at what those guidelines and standards are, and even, like I said, is AI like a specialty area? Like how we're in the process of doing that and figuring that out now, and so that way we can give guide to nurses and to nursing educators on this subject matter. I think that's probably one of the biggest questions I get is on the faculty side, how do we really make sure our students are doing the right thing? Because we don't, if they're using generative AI to do their projects or their work for them, are they then in fact actually learning? And even though they have, nursing schools then have clinical programming or clinical rotations that they have to go and be with patients, there's still that connect that they need to do their projects. And so how do, the guidelines that we all are working on should be aligned to help make those decisions, but it's still being defined. But I will say everything still stays the same regardless of what the program is. Any type of tool or clinical decision making tool or EMR, EHR, it still needs to have quite a rigorous evaluation and validation of the use of it. Clinical trials, any peer review, accreditation, the integration of any type of system or tool needs to have human oversight, like we just talked about before. It's not going to replace the human at the end. And then creating the right workflows. So I think generally speaking, we don't really take direct measures to ensure that they have these high standards. Now, could that come down the road? I know that there are other organizations that are considering what that looks like. But at the end of the day, our position will, as it states now, will always be that nurses need to be involved in the decision making of these tools and how they're utilized. And so we advocate for nurses to be able to have the conversation with the tech team, with the dev team, with the IT team, with the on the programming side of how to best utilize it and implement them. Because at the end of the day, they're ultimately responsible for the care of the patient. So stay tuned for more on that with the ANA. We'll hopefully have something out by the end of the year that will at least provide some framework and some guidelines for nurses to move forward.
Great. Okay, and as we know, there's a global shortage in the nurses, and especially in the remote areas, I would say, where there's a lack of resources, medical equipment. I would say even the very easy thing which could be internet.
Yeah.
So, how do you deal with those situations? How do you deal with that with the help of technology or AI or anything else?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that I love so much about what I do, and being able to provide, learning and resource and tools in a digital platform. I think that there are, assuming that there are areas in rural areas across the world that simply don't have these types of resources. And in fact, we know that that's true. We partner with several other international organizations to help provide some education to their nurses, and that's because assuming that there's internet, and in some areas there's not, but in some areas that they do have it, they may not have, like I said, a simulation lab, or even the ability to study for tests in a Q banks and things like that are really what you call simple. But it's really important to us to make sure that these modules, learning materials, help bridge the gap that we see in urban versus rural areas, and the skill set. Because at the end of the day, the technologies can really improve that knowledge for nurses across the globe. I think that in other applications of other technologies, remote patient monitoring, telehealth, that is a big thing that I think that would greatly benefit in those rural areas. We know that helps with wearables and things like that nurses then need to get training on how to evaluate and respond to those wearables, and looking at telehealth as well. ANA will also be coming out with a position statement on virtual nursing and what that looks like. And we are getting feedback from our members and registered nurses across the globe now about what that looks like, and how we need to define that. AI assisted clinical decision support built into EHRs. That's going to be, again, point of care using predictive analytics is going to be really helpful. And that will help provide rural nurses the ability to, if they don't have a regular cadence of these types of patients, if they see a patient that's really different than what they're used to taking care of, that those predictive analytics may be able to help them, and data sharing back and forth about what that looks like, so that they can learn how to best treat and do evidence-based practice on those patients that they don't see regularly. We talked a little bit already about virtual reality, augmented reality. Those training programs can still provide, and there's a lot of research on this already, that provide immersive training experience for nurses. So it still can simulate real life scenarios without the need for physical resources like a brick and mortar building or a sim lab that can cost millions of dollars. If the cost for VR headset and VR programming and AR, which is probably even less expensive, may actually help those rural nurses the most across the globe. And then just, virtual communities, doing things like this, listening to podcasts, getting educated that way. Again, this is all predicated on, internet, the accessibility of that internet, and the reliability of it to be able to do it. But I think it's also an argument for why internet should be available to everyone. But it is important that our programming at the ANA, as well as programming across the globe, can start to make sure that they're also integrating and have a responsibility to integrate into rural areas, so that way nurses can be practicing at the top of their skill.
Perfect. Thank you so much for answering that. And because you mentioned the programs, the online programs, so how do you ensure the continuous upskilling of the nurses? And how did MRCC help you in this process?
So as we know, upskilling nurses is crucial to enhancing our patient care, improving our operational efficiency, and then maintaining standards of high standards of clinical practice. So we've done it in quite a holistic type way. We've made sure that our curriculum development is we develop and integrate AI into our curriculum development and our content development. And we make sure all of those things are being upheld in healthcare, evidence-based practice, and ethical considerations. We are using, and the other piece and what is part of that holistic and what we've done with you all is collaborate with you all as technology experts. Between the collaboration between, your team and mine and what that content looks like it gives us the ability to stay ahead of the latest advancements and incorporate cutting edge technology tools inside training programs or education content. We, as from an association perspective, we don't, have a team of developers solely dedicated to this. We've got nurses and we've got instructional designers, but integrating that type of and leveraging that technology and seeing it with your eyes and the experts is really important. So those relationships and that work is really important, and it gives it a fresh look. I think one of the things that, again, going back to what the whole goal of those programs is to really get nurses practicing at the top of their license. And for us in particular, in their advanced certifications. So we want them to not just sit and pass their RN NCLEX, but we want them and encourage them to, once they have that clinical practice, a couple years under their belt, is to sit for advanced certification so that that validates their knowledge and what they know in their practice environment. And incorporating that into our educational review programs is really important, and how to make sure that they pass that second exam is really important to us. And then just, because at the end of the day, we just try to keep fostering a culture of lifelong learning. It is actually one of our ethical tenets for nurses, is that we have to keep up with our professional practice. We have to continually educate ourselves, and making sure that we are keeping up to date on all of those things. And again, partnering with MRCC and tech companies that can actually help us get these programs, kind of expertly created and curated, and then launched effectively and quickly is something that we love doing, and we want to keep doing more, and really being able to get these things out faster, because we want nurses to be able to have access to them as quickly as possible.
Excellent. And my next question to you would be, what are the kind of feedbacks do you receive from these nurses who are already enrolled in these programs, or they're dealing with these AI built systems already?
Yeah, so it's generally been positive. I've led a couple discussions on this, and so the feedback itself has been positive. The experience, though, is still at a level where most nurses are still trying to wrap their heads around what this means in the application of their practice. So most, they're really just trying to absorb the basics, like even understanding what AI is and how that already has been in use for a number of years. And then now what makes this new buzzword, Gen AI, or like buzzwords are everywhere. And so what makes this different? And so trying to help nurses, understand those basics has been really important to do. And once then they understand those basics, it's been quite positive. Right now, the feedback on those, like those robotics and those administrative tasks that they don't have to do anymore, has been overwhelmingly positive. There's Christiana Healthcare in the United States has been working with a group that has a robot that just goes and picks up things from the utility closet. There's an order that's put in. They need an IV kit. That robot just goes along to the hospital and go through the hospital into the utility room, picks it up and brings it to the nurse. So they don't have to go running for their supplies. And so it's been overwhelmingly positive for that. It gives them more time to focus on the patient and the patient care. There's also some standards and some streamlined workflows related to documentation that are in the works. Love that, because it puts us, as long as it puts nurses in the room and taking care of patients more, that is the positive feedback. Because at the end of the day, what this also does is it improves patient outcomes. We know that when nurses are there and they are not pulled away in 100 different directions, patients survive, patients do better. So there are a lot of those systems that are in the works now too. There's some early detection systems that are, especially in the sepsis framework, that seem to have really great promising results. Looking at clinical education tools and things like that you could provide your patients that is curtailed to what their needs are, so you can educate your patients a little bit more effectively. There are some staffing models that are being looked at, so that's always a big thing, as looking at predictive staffing. So there's a lot of things to come with this, and like I said, we mentioned before, the remote patient care monitoring and those types of things. But I think overall positive. I think the concern is always with the ethics, and is this going to take over my job? And so again, going back to the I think the first or second question, is the way this is framed and is going to be very important, and the way, and then those guidelines that follow, because it cannot supersede and be seen as something that is replacing the human factor and the human nurse. But the integration of it can actually help us do our jobs better. So again, it's going to take time. It's still ever evolving and ever changing. But if we look at those stories that have been successful with their resource allocation and the integration of ethical considerations in the use, then I think we're going to be on a good track, and it's going to continue to be positive.
Nice to know that. And lately, we see a lot of legal cases in the medical or the, I would say, healthcare, and those are because of some of the data leak issues or some of that. So, how do you think that AI will secure your data, the patient's data?
Yeah, I think there's, it's really big consideration. I mean, I think every day we hear of some sort of data leak out of somewhere, but I don't think it's going to be any any larger difference or a big difference than what we already need to do for protecting patient data. And it's, again, it has to be, data encryption has to be a high standard, and I think that definitely. And we've been doing this for as long as I've been a nurse, informed consent. When we start to incorporate things like bots or any type of clinical decision-making tool, it's going to be important for for patients and families to be able to have the information to say, yes, we are using this in our system. So they are fully aware that those AI systems are being utilized and integrated within within the hospital or within the system that they're choosing, and then how that data is used, how their patient data then feeds the AI or whatever system that they're using into, especially on that clinical decision making side. So I think transparency is going to be really important in this, as it always is. The Institute for Healthcare Improvement has it's IHI.org. They have a data privacy kind of artificial intelligence guideline that I think most systems use already. And I think it's just important to keep consistent with that. Again, always developing, because as the AI develops, so does this is ever changing. But I think that's a good framework to start with. And it really is just about being transparent, having opt in or opt out options, to say, no, I don't really want this integrated, because it's at the end of the day that it's the patient's data, so they should have power over that. And just being able to make sure that that again that protection, that encryption is in place.
Perfect. Thank you for answering that. And one of the very common question I get from the people is about the concern, the kind of job displacement is going to happen because of the AI adoption. So how do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, the big thing is the ethics behind it, and the second one is it going to take my job? And so again, framing it and addressing the concerns about the displacement is going to be making sure that everybody it can adopt it, and it's a smooth adoption, and maintains the trust and morale of nurses and all healthcare professionals, to be honest. So again, emphasizing it as a supportive tool, and communicate that AI is designed to augment the work of nurses and healthcare providers, enhancing efficiencies, reducing the workload, improving patient outcomes. Like, if we can connect all those dots, I think those fears will calm down. I think the other thing that, as an educator, you kind of show them, like, so let's provide examples and case studies that demonstrate how the AI has positively impacted nursing practice. And in our ANA innovation team, as well as the American Nurses Foundation, our Reimagining Nursing initiative, they have those case studies and those examples, and so we're championing those that are making great strides in the not just AI specific, but also in innovative ideas on how to improve practice and improve patient outcomes. Making associations or anybody really needs to make sure that they're investing in educating nurses on AI. I've seen several schools of nursing who are starting to actually integrate AI into their programs, and what that looks like for nurses and how to get involved, and just the basics of that. And I think that is an extraordinarily great idea. It's just have the conversation, and let's start training nurses on what this is, so that way nurses can have a seat at the table, and we're not just stuck being told, what, here you go, here's your AI tool, here's how to use it. But what if it's not the right thing? And so nurses people have to invest in the training and education for nurses on AI, and then nurses have to want to sit down and really be able to learn about what this means for them, so they can have that knowledge in order to sit down and have those conversations. There's opportunities for it to also enhance our roles. I'm talking about AI today. I never thought even 5 years ago I would be doing this. And what does that mean? Does it mean that more nurses can now take on roles within tech organizations or companies like yours that are doing healthcare education and things like that? What are those role enhancements and opportunities that we can do that and provide nurses? And if that's the case, then that's a whole nother specialty or role that will be a positive change for nurses, and not make them seem as if AI is coming to take over for their roles, and so showing those benefits, because I do think it already has a tremendous impact on how our roles evolve. If AI continually evolves and it gets better and improves and becomes this amazing tool, then of course our role is going to change, because we won't have to do all of those things. And so now it lets us finally do what we got into the profession to do, first and foremost, which is really taking care of patients and families and making sure that people are healthy, and that they're cared for. So, it will allow those nurses to do that. So I think it is, again, in the framework, and then ensuring those adjustments to the systems and the workflows is based on what nurses need, and not what, the next round of, AI kind of looks like.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much for answering that. And my last question would be, what milestone do you hope to achieve in coming years?
Oh gosh. So I really hope that for me, I think milestones for me personally would be obviously to keep on this track of advancing nursing education and training, using innovative e-learning programs and partners like MRCC and really enhancing the quality and the accessibility of nursing education across the globe. Um, just generally, from an A&A perspective, making sure that we're enhancing or we're utilizing AI ourselves in an ethical and formalized guideline that we're creating now, like I mentioned before, but also to help nurses advocate for themselves in learning AI and the integration into clinical practice and empowering nurses to have those conversations. So we will, helping nurses establish what those best practices are for them in their own clinical practice and in their own clinical setting. And what's good for one might not be good for the other. So having those best practices and those resources all together would be, really amazing. I think just workforce development, inclusivity, I think is also something that, if I, kind of would, kind of milestones I, want to see achieve, making sure that our education programs are in fact doing what they say, which is to enhance workforce development and making sure that all of them are inclusive in their in the education, the content itself, but also promote equitable access to nursing education. And then, as usually, the usual thing is for the A&A is influencing, what we do and advocating for nurses across the globe, and fostering those partnerships and innovations and all the work that we do to support nurses. So I think I have a couple, personal ones in there, but also ones that are at the A&A level, which kind of goes together. But yeah, I think there's several things that I would like to see. I could quality information research. I would really love to see those things happen for nurses on that innovation and the technology side and how we're and enhancing that. So and however I can amplify that in my role, that's what I love to do.
Perfect. And before we wrap up, I would like to kind of let our people know more about the impact of A&A on the global nursing, and the same letting us know how big is the A&A and what set of standards it makes in the nursing industry globally.
So A&A is the premier association for the 5 million registered nurses in the United States. We are partnered with the International Council of Nurses. We have several global partners across the globe, but our vision is a healthy world through the power of nursing, and then our core values are kind of aligned with a lot of the other nursing organizations as well. But we are in the United States the premier organization for and represent all of the 5 million in registered nurses across the United States. So we partner, like I said, with the most large nursing organizations. We also have several state nursing associations that we collaborate with and work with directly. So we're while we're the national one we're at the national level, we have all of our state or associations as well that we work with directly to meet the needs of nurses in those individual states. Because as most people know, in the United States, some states nursing practice varies from state to state in some ways. So we work, and that's why it's important for us to represent all of nursing in the United States, because everybody needs something different in those states. So it's kind of like we set the tone up at the top national level, but then the states work what they need to do for their nurses in their own state. So yeah, that's kind of what we do and how far we reach.
Perfect. And that sums my entire discussion with you. And trust me, I have learned a lot of new things from you, and I'm sure our viewers will also learn something from this podcast.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I love talking about these things, and I just appreciate the opportunity to do this with you.
thank you so much, Dr. Jennifer, for your time, and I wish you a great day ahead.
Thank you. You too.
All right.